Welcome to a story whispered through the shadows of ancient Rome, a night many Roman brides feared but history rarely explains. Tonight, we uncover the hidden marriage ritual that turned a wedding into a test of courage, backed by careful research and true historical sources. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe to support the countless hours spent verifying facts and separating myth from reality, because stories like this deserve to be told the right way. In ancient Rome, marriage was far less about love and far more about power. Families treated marriage as a strategic alliance, a way to secure wealth, social standing, and political influence. A Roman bride was not choosing a partner. She was becoming part of a carefully arranged transaction between two households. For viewers today, this can feel shocking, but in Roman society, marriage was one of the strongest tools for maintaining control over class and legacy. At the center of Roman marriage was property. A woman often came with a dowry, and that dowry represented land, money, or political leverage. Once married, her legal and financial identity shifted dramatically. In many cases, control over her assets moved into the hands of her husband or his family, reinforcing the idea that marriage was not personal. It was economic. This reality shaped every ritual surrounding Roman weddings. Power also showed itself through law. Roman fathers held patria potestas, absolute authority over their children, including daughters. A bride's consent mattered far less than her father's decision. Marriage transferred authority from one man to another, making the bride a living symbol of obedience and continuity. This legal framework explains why fear and submission became embedded themes in Roman wedding traditions. Social control played a major role as well. Roman society valued stability, order, and lineage above individual happiness. Marriage ensured legitimate heirs and preserved family bloodlines. Women were expected to adapt quickly, leaving their childhood homes behind and embracing new roles without question. Any hesitation was seen not as emotion, but as disobedience. Understanding marriage as power and control helps explain why certain rituals felt terrifying to Roman brides. The ceremonies were designed to reflect dominance, transition, and loss of autonomy. What looked like celebration on the surface often masked deep anxiety underneath, setting the stage for the disturbing nighttime ritual that many Roman brides silently dreaded. In ancient Rome, becoming a bride was not just a personal milestone. It was a legal transformation. The moment a woman married, her identity under Roman law could change completely. She was no longer defined by her own will or ambitions, but by her position within a male-controlled household. To Romans, marriage was a legal mechanism designed to move authority, responsibility, and obedience from one family structure to another. There were different types of Roman marriages, but the most powerful form placed the bride in manu, under the legal hand of her husband. This meant she was treated almost like a daughter within his family, subject to his authority in much the same way she once was to her father. Her legal independence disappeared, and with it, much of her control over property and personal decisions. For many women, this shift happened overnight. Even in marriages where a woman remained legally tied to her father, the reality was not freedom. Social expectations still demanded obedience to the husband, and public life remained off limits. A Roman bride was expected to represent honor, fertility, and silence. Her behavior reflected not only on herself, but on the reputation of two powerful families. The law also reinforced permanence. Divorce existed, but it was far easier for men than for women. A bride entered marriage knowing that escape was rare and often shameful. This legal imbalance created a quiet fear surrounding marriage, especially for young women who had little understanding of what awaited them. When you understand the legal meaning of a Roman bride, the wedding rituals take on a darker tone. They weren't symbolic traditions alone, they were legal signals of ownership and transfer. Every gesture, every ceremony, reminded the bride that her life had crossed a line, one that could not easily be undone. The deductio in domum meriti was one of the most dramatic moments in a Roman wedding, and the one many brides feared the most. This ritual marked the exact instant a woman left her childhood home and entered her husband's household. Unlike modern weddings filled with joy and celebration, this procession symbolized separation, loss, and irreversible change. For Roman brides, it was the point of no return. Traditionally, the ritual took place at night, illuminated by torches and accompanied by chanting crowds. The bride was escorted through the streets by the groom, his friends, and witnesses. She wore the flammeum, a bright orange, red veil meant to signal fertility and protection, but it also hid her face, adding to the sense of fear and uncertainty. Neighbors watched closely, because this moment carried legal and social weight. One of the most unsettling aspects of the deductio was the bride's expected resistance. She was supposed to cry, hesitate, or symbolically struggle as she was led away. This behavior wasn't discouraged, it was required. Romans believed a modest woman would naturally fear leaving her family, and the staged struggle reinforced ideals of purity, obedience, and male dominance. The groom's role was equally symbolic. He did not gently guide his bride, instead, he took her, echoing older traditions tied to conquest and possession. His friends played an active part, cheering and sometimes mocking, turning a deeply personal moment into a public display of power and transition. For the bride, privacy did not exist. By the time the procession reached the groom's home, the ritual had done its job. The bride was no longer her father's daughter. She was now legally and socially bound to her husband. What looked like tradition was, in reality, a carefully designed ceremony meant to enforce control, submission, and acceptance of a new life chosen for her. Nighttime in ancient Rome carried powerful meaning, and that's exactly why brides were taken after sunset. Romans believed the night marked transition between childhood and adulthood, family and marriage, freedom and obligation. Moving a bride in darkness symbolized crossing an invisible boundary, one that could not be reversed once the torches were lit and the procession began. There was also a strong element of superstition. Romans feared evil spirits and bad omens, and paradoxically believed darkness offered protection from them. Torches, chants, and noise were meant to confuse hostile forces and shield the bride from misfortune. To the community, the night ritual wasn't just tradition, it was spiritual defense wrapped in ceremony. But beyond belief, night offered control. Darkness reduced resistance and heightened fear. A bride surrounded by strangers, noise, and flickering firelight was less likely to defy the ritual. The timing ensured the transition happened quickly and decisively, limiting emotional hesitation or public protest from the bride or her family. Privacy also played a role, but not for the bride. The night concealed her emotions while still allowing witnesses to confirm the marriage transfer. Her tears and fear could exist without disrupting the social order. In daylight, such distress might have appeared improper or raised uncomfortable questions. In the end, taking Roman brides at night was no accident. It blended religion, psychology, and social dominance into a single moment. What seemed ceremonial was actually strategic, using darkness to enforce obedience, accelerate transition, and remind the bride that her old life had already faded into the shadows. In ancient Roman weddings, fear was not an accident. It was part of the design. Roman culture believed that a good bride should feel anxious about leaving her family and entering marriage. Fear symbolized modesty, purity, and obedience. A calm or eager bride could be seen as improper, even suspicious, so anxiety became a performance expected by society. Resistance, especially during the wedding procession, carried deep symbolic meaning. Brides were expected to hesitate, cry or struggle lightly as were led away. This was not rebellion, it was ritual. The act reassured the community that the bride had not acted on her own desire, protecting her reputation and the honor of both families. This staged fear also echoed Rome's violent past. The symbolism traced back to legendary stories like the abduction of the Sabine women, where force and conquest were woven into Rome's identity. By reenacting fear and resistance, Roman weddings subtly reinforced the idea that marriage, like empire, involved dominance and submission. Psychologically, the ritual prepared the bride for her new reality. By experiencing fear publicly, she was conditioned to accept authority privately. The ceremony sent a clear message. Her emotions were secondary to duty. Resistance was allowed only as symbolism, never as true defiance. To modern eyes, this may seem cruel, but to ancient Romans, it was tradition with purpose. Fear and resistance were tools used to shape behavior, reinforce gender roles, and maintain social order. What looked like a wedding ritual was, in truth, a lesson in control that every Roman bride was expected to learn. In ancient Roman weddings, the groom was not a passive figure waiting at the altar. He was an active symbol of authority. His role during the marriage rituals was to demonstrate control, leadership, and readiness to claim his household. The way he behaved during the procession sent a clear message to the community. He was assuming legal and social power over his bride. The groom's friends played an equally important role, acting as witnesses and enforcers of tradition. They accompanied the couple through the streets, singing loud, often crude songs meant to ward off evil spirits and mock the seriousness of the moment. To outsiders, it may have looked festive, but for the bride, it turned a private transition into a public spectacle. These friends also helped maintain pressure. Their presence discouraged hesitation and ensured the ritual followed strict expectations. Any sign of genuine resistance could be overridden by laughter, chanting, or physical guidance. The group dynamic made it nearly impossible for the bride to express real fear or refusal. Symbolically, the groom's companions represented Roman society itself. They stood for male authority, social approval, and communal control. By surrounding the groom, They reinforced the idea that marriage was not just between two individuals, it was sanctioned and enforced by the wider community. By the end of the ritual, the groom's dominance was firmly established. Supported by his peers, he entered his home not just as a husband, but as a man validated by tradition and law. For the bride, this moment confirmed a harsh truth. Her new life was shaped not by choice, but by collective expectation and control. One of the most unsettling parts of a Roman wedding was the bride's simulated struggle. This moment was not spontaneous emotion, it was carefully expected behavior. As she was led from her father's home, the bride was supposed to resist slightly, cry, or appear fearful. To Roman society, this performance proved her virtue and modesty. The struggle symbolized that the bride was not acting on desire. Romans believed a respectable woman should not eagerly leave her family or rush into marriage. By resisting, even symbolically, she protected her honor and avoided suspicion. Ironically, obedience was proven through the appearance of resistance. This ritual also reinforced male dominance. The groom and his companions overcame the bride's hesitation, presenting marriage as an act of authority rather than partnership. The message was clear. A woman's role was to submit, not to choose. The struggle made that power dynamic visible to everyone watching. Emotionally, the experience could be confusing and frightening. Young brides, often teenagers, were expected to act out fear while actually feeling it. The line between performance and reality blurred. What was meant to be symbolic may have felt deeply real, leaving lasting impressions of anxiety and loss. To modern audiences, this simulated struggle feels disturbing, but in ancient Rome it was tradition disguised as morality. It taught the bride her place from the very first moment of marriage. What looked like ritual theater was, in truth, a powerful lesson in control that shaped her life from that night forward. Religion shaped every stage of a Roman wedding, and the frightening rituals surrounding brides were believed to be guided by the gods themselves. Romans thought marriage was dangerous spiritual territory, a moment when a woman was vulnerable to bad luck, curses, and jealous spirits. To protect her, ceremonies were filled with religious symbols that blended fear with faith. Multiple gods were invoked during the wedding process. Juno, protector of marriage and women, was honored to ensure fertility and loyalty. Vesta represented the sacred hearth the bride was leaving behind, while she was expected to honor the household gods of her husband upon arrival. This spiritual transfer was just as important as the legal one. Torches, chants, and noise were not random traditions. Romans believed loud sounds scared away evil forces that might harm the bride or make the marriage infertile. Even the crude songs sung by the groom's friends had a religious purpose. They distracted hostile spirits through chaos and mockery. Superstition also explained the bride's fear. Appearing anxious was thought to please the gods, showing humility and respect for fate. A confident or joyful bride risked attracting envy from divine forces. Fear became a form of spiritual protection, woven directly into the ceremony. To the Romans, these rituals were not cruel, they were necessary. Religion justified every tear and every moment of fear. What modern viewers see as oppression, ancient Romans saw as obedience to divine order, proving how deeply belief shaped the lives and emotions of Roman brides. The shadow of the Sabine women legend loomed heavily over Roman marriage traditions. According to Roman mythology, Rome's earliest men abducted women from the neighboring Sabine tribe to secure wives and ensure the city's survival. This violent origin story wasn't hidden or denied. It was celebrated as a foundational moment of Roman identity. Over time, this legend shaped how Romans understood marriage itself. The idea that women were taken rather than chosen became normalized. Wedding rituals echoed this myth, especially in the bride's forced departure and symbolic resistance. Every Roman marriage subtly reenacted the city's legendary beginning. The simulated struggle of brides directly mirrored the Sabine women's abduction. Romans believed this reenactment honored their ancestors and reinforced cultural continuity. What began as myth turned into ritual, embedding conquest and dominance into everyday life. For brides, this connection added emotional weight. They weren't just entering a marriage, they were playing a role in a centuries-old story built on force. The ritual reminded them that Roman society valued tradition over personal comfort or consent. To modern audiences, it's unsettling to see violence transformed into ceremony. Yet for ancient Romans, the Sabine legend justified their customs and values. By weaving myth into marriage, Rome ensured that even love and family were shaped by power, conquest, and control. Behind the public rituals and religious symbolism, Roman brides faced a deeply personal emotional reality. Many were very young, sometimes barely in their teens, with little understanding of marriage beyond fear and expectation. The wedding night marked the sudden end of childhood and the beginning of a life defined by duty rather than choice. Leaving their family home was often traumatic. Roman women were expected to cut emotional ties quickly and adapt to a new household with unfamiliar rules and authority. Any visible sadness beyond the ritual itself was discouraged. Grief was private, while obedience was public. Loneliness was common. A bride entered a home where she held the lowest status, surrounded by in-laws and servants who answered to her husband. She was expected to learn new customs, honor new household gods, and produce heirs, all while suppressing her own identity. Anxiety did not end with the wedding night. A woman's worth became tied to fertility and loyalty. Failure to produce children or meet expectations could lead to rejection, humiliation, or divorce. Emotional support was rare, and legal protections were limited. When we look back, it's easy to focus on tradition and ceremony, but the emotional cost was real. Roman marriage demanded silence, strength, and endurance from women. Behind the torchlight and celebration was a quiet truth. Many brides entered marriage not with joy, but with fear. They were never allowed to speak aloud. The frightening marriage rituals of ancient Rome did more than mark a wedding. They helped shape the entire structure of Roman society. By turning marriage into a controlled public event, Rome reinforced clear power hierarchies. Everyone watching understood who held authority and who was expected to submit. These rituals trained society from a young age. Girls learned what awaited them, while boys learned what was expected of them. Marriage became a lesson in obedience, dominance, and duty, passed down generation after generation. Tradition ensured that social roles were rarely questioned. The impact extended beyond the household. Stable marriages produced legitimate heirs, secured property lines, and strengthened political alliances. Fear-based rituals helped maintain order by discouraging rebellion and reinforcing loyalty to family and state above individual desire. Religion and law worked together to legitimize these customs. When gods, myths, and legal authority all supported the same structure, resistance became almost impossible. What felt personal was actually political, shaping Rome's strength and longevity as an empire. Even today, the legacy lingers. These rituals remind us how deeply culture can influence relationships and identity. By understanding how Roman marriage shaped society, we gain insight into how power, tradition, and fear can become normalized, and how history quietly echoes into the present.